Well, welcome everybody. I'm Jeff Finkel, CEO of the ArcView Group, and thank you for joining us. This is going to be a great program today, making data-driven decisions in the cannabis industry. Over the years, I've listened to a number of webinars that talk about collected data and its importance, but none that's really dove deep into real applications for its use. So that's what we're hoping to do today. And it's really become a mission of ArcView Access to deliver significantly nuanced content that's actionable and that's not always obvious. So I hope you'll agree that this program today will fit the bill. All right, as I set the stage today, let's learn a little bit about you. Please take a few seconds to complete the poll that should be popping up on your screen, and then we'll feed more into the meaty part of today's program. Now, I know many of you have been part of the ArcView community since it was founded in 2010. And I also know some of you are unfamiliar with our history, so let me tell you a little bit about who we are. ArcView was founded by Troy Dayton and Steve D'Angelo in 2010. Troy and Steve's mission really was to create a first of its kind and much needed safe haven for both investors and entrepreneurs, but with social equity at the core. They were appalled, and I think they remain so today, at the stigma around the cannabis industry and related social justice issues. So our core offering in the beginning was as an investor network and an investor conference producer, and we still produce conferences. We, in fact, just hosted two really great ArcView summits, one in New York City in October and one in December in Miami. They were our 49th and 50th, and they were really extraordinary. And we're going to do more in-person events focused on investing and financing needs. So stay tuned for future announcements because they're coming. And we're going to continue to produce webinars like today. We all want to keep learning, and there's so much to learn as this is a pretty complex sector to navigate. And we've got a bunch more coming. Now, in addition to being a conference producer, we also operate a venture fund, and we're seeking a few more investments in that fund. So please send us your executive summaries or deck. If you're raising, we look for companies that we call early growth stage, so ideally post-revenue. We're also open to putting together special purpose vehicles made up of investor members from our community. So be sure to connect with us, and we'll let you know if we think we can be successful for you. Another part of our ecosystem is our consulting arm that provides business planning, investor presentations, cultivation facility planning, and brand expansion to other states, and brokerage services for used equipment, in addition to the core service, really, which is licensed pursuit. Now, that entity is about to launch a service. I could say about. They've just launched a service that helps companies restructure and, if need be, wind down comfortably and efficiently outside the court system. This is a great service for venture investors, board members, and operating officers when the decision has been made to wind down a company. It gives them safe cover. In fact, that was the subject of the webinar we did last month, and you can go listen to it on our replay page. Actually, I encourage you to go there. We have a library of impactful programs with industry thought leaders. I think it's been viewed by over 36,000 people, or 36,000 have registered for it, and we've been doing those since 2020, so that's quite a lot of views. So to learn more about our consulting group, I think, Carolyn, you're going to put that in the chat. Thank you. www.arcviewconsulting.com. Lastly, we have a marketing services arm that offers full range of services, including branding, collateral, website development, lead gen program strategy, and a CMO fractional service. So yeah, look in that chat screen and you'll see all of our ecosystem links. All right, before we move on to our program, let me just take one moment and thank our strategic alliance partners. Green Tank, they're a provisioner of innovative vape hardware. PayQuick, which offers treasury services for cannabis licenses, which is now about to merge with Green Check Verified. SuperNet, a provider of closed-loop credit card services for cannabis dispensaries. And of course, our data partner, Hoodie Analytics, and we're happy to have Kelly from Hoodie participating today. We appreciate their support. We appreciate their place in the ecosystem and this community. All right, so let's get to the program. Let me now introduce our moderator, David Abernethy. David's been with ArcView since 2009. He's filled numerous roles here, probably too many to mention today. I think of him as a sort of a true Swiss Army knife. David is also a data geek, and he now serves as a principal of ArcView Consulting. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, off to you. I am out for the while. Thank you, guys.
Excellent. So just as a sort of way to level set, data in the cannabis industry is something that's both near and dear to my heart and something that I use in all of my work across the cannabis industry every day. When I got started in the cannabis industry, data was really hard to come by. When we launched ArcView Market Research in 2013 and started writing reports about the cannabis industry, it was unbelievably challenging to find little clues and breadcrumbs. We had to talk to individual operators. We had to make a lot of really big assumptions to try to put some numbers and some parameters around the size of the industry, understand how consumers behaved within that industry, what kinds of products we're selling. Over the years, the data landscape has gotten much richer. Companies started popping up offering point of sale data, offering all sorts of really interesting consumer data. At this point, in our consulting work, we use everything from point of sale data to distribution data, product pricing data, product form data, really granular consumer survey data. And we're able to build really complex and importantly predictive pictures of what's happening in the cannabis industry. So we've got a great group of panelists here to talk with us about data and how they use data in various contexts. So with that, I will introduce Tali Wetlaufer, who's the former SVP of Retail for Curaleaf, Rory McLean, Director of Wholesale for TrueLeaf, Ian Dominguez, Portfolio Manager at Delta Emerald Ventures, and Kelly Bernaza Hall, Senior VP of Customer Services for Hoodie Analytics. Welcome. Tali, why don't we start with you? If you can give folks just a very quick overview of who you are and what you do in the industry.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I've been in the cannabis industry for 4 years. I started in a small business called Grassroots. At the time, we were 150 million or so in revenue with 13 dispensaries. Grew that business to 40 dispensaries and was purchased by Curaleaf, where I was tapped to manage the entire retail footprint and grew that business to over $1 billion in retail revenue. And 135 dispensaries in 18 states with about 3,500 people in that organization.
Excellent. Rory?
Thanks. Yeah, my name's Rory McLean, Director of Wholesale for TrueLeaf. Longtime cannabis advocate, legislative reform participant. I'm a true believer. I think that we are going to heal the planet with cannabis. So a little idealist in that sense. But, you know, I started my career in sort of cannabis or cannabis adjacent industry in CBD. I had a small startup CBD company. Sold that 4 years ago and joined a company called Standard Wellness in Ohio, and was really lucky to help get that off the ground and create a vertical structure in Ohio and oversee retail and wholesale operations for Standard Wellness. 4 months ago, I left them after we had achieved presence in 4 states and joined TrueLeaf to do the same things, but sort of zero in and focus solely on wholesale here at TrueLeaf. So excited to be here and thanks for the introduction.
Thanks. Ian?
Hi, everybody. Ian Dominguez, Portfolio Manager of Delta Emerald Ventures. We style Delta Emerald as a data-enabled cannabis fund. And as for my background, from Houston originally, built my career at a number of multi-billion-dollar hedge funds where my focus was consumer packaged goods and consumer tech companies. And as for the cannabis industry, it's something I've been passionate about for a very long time. And Delta Emerald was founded 4 years ago on one simple idea, which is that the transfer of information in cannabis is somewhat broken today. The good news is that our view is that those that help in making that information flow more freely are likely to create value in this industry. And that's how we spend a lot of our time.
Excellent. And Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Kelly Bernazza Hall. I'm a co-founder and SVP of customer success here at Hoodie Analytics. About 20 years experience in the data and analytics space, specifically in cannabis for over 4 years now. Actually, I have a connection with Tally way back when I first joined into the cannabis industry, working very closely with the grassroots team as extension of their IT team and their analytics team. But obviously now here with Hoodie. Before that, I started way back when at Nielsen, really working to understand data in the CPG and BevAl spaces. Just a little bit on Hoodie very quickly. Our mission is to connect business and consumers with the most useful cannabis information to make better decisions. As you've already heard, and know personally, cannabis data is really difficult. It's messy, it's not consistent. It can be really hard to talk between ourselves with the data that's available. We really help to unify the data and analytics out in the industry, provide that holistic view of the market, not only what is available for consumers to purchase, but understanding wholesale retail performance, customer traffic, loyalty, and coming soon, sales estimates as well. Again, our whole purpose here is to help the industry by providing actionable and useful information.
Excellent. So one of the really nice things about the makeup of this panel is we have folks from sort of quite a few different angles of the cannabis business, which I'm sure will make for a really interesting conversation about how to use data in a variety of different environments. Let's start with the topic of building a data-driven culture. What does that mean? That's a term that gets thrown around a lot. Data-driven decisions, data-driven culture. Anyone want to talk about in concrete terms what that means for your business?
I mean, I can start from a retail perspective, right? I mean, I think it's very easy for people to say, "Oh, this sold well," right? And it's really right. It's a world of people like, oh, whether it's somebody felt like, hey, I made 3 sales one day of it, or somebody else feeling good about a product or that sort of thing. But really, there is a world of saying, okay, well, what does selling well mean, right? What are our goals? What does that mean? And what supports that? And I think it's in everything you do, but right, it's getting people away from the gut conversation and making sure everyone's aligned on what are the goals, what are the things that we define as, success measures, performance indicators, whatever it may be. And even if it's just as simple as just saying, hey, what do we consider a bestseller? Is it something that sells out quickly? Is it something that makes the most money? Is it something that sells the most units? But I think it's having all of that to sit there and say, gut's important, but making sure that you have the information and that everybody knows, what you're marching towards.
I can chime in too. I think at Delta Emerald, we're big fans of this concept that in order to improve something, you need to measure it at first. And it's important to remember the roots of this industry are very much decades of learned behavior of, frankly, being born in darkness. And darkness, when I say that, I mean intentionally being under the radar, where it was actually against your interest to write things down because it might send you to jail. And so you're talking about learned behaviors over decades that is changing bit by bit, and it's accepting that one cannot make assumptions about how things should be or are, but instead really rooting yourself in what do we actually know, and then trying to also consistently ask yourself new questions. This is how, in my opinion, you build a data oriented organization and culture.
And the data culture in any company is going to become more and more important in cannabis, right? Especially when the industry was much newer. You heard the expression "printing money," right? You could go on gut feel. You could be relatively successful without a lot of data behind directing those decisions. As markets mature, as new dispensaries open, as new brands enter the market, it's becoming, as all of us know, tougher and tougher for margin, to make money, to grow, and it needs to be less of a reliance on gut and more reliance on the reality of what's happening in the market. So as what you're saying, we can continue to build and grow based on facts and data.
And I think from a wholesale perspective too, it's very interesting, the concept of a data-driven culture, because with what we do, right, 10 years ago and 20 years ago, a lot of people in wholesale, which we are one step removed from the customer experience with the B2B nature of what we do, we used to think relationships are enough. It's all about relationships. But I think those times are behind us. And, to really exceed and excel and set yourselves apart, your brand apart, and your salespeople apart, there has to be more, right? You can't just be, everybody wants to buy from their friends, but these days, you bring something more to the table, and some of that is valuable information that's going to make that buyer or the general manager of that dispensary perform well and succeed in their business, or just look good to their bosses. And if you can be that source of valuable information, that's that value added piece that goes beyond quality and price. Everyone has to have good quality this day and age. You have to have competitive pricing. What's the extra thing that we can add? And I try to convince our sales leaders to add that data.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about how use of data has changed and evolved within your respective companies over time. Any thoughts on that? I know the data landscape has certainly changed, but have you found that there are strategies or techniques that you have come across that have changed the way you treat data, or really changed the way you leverage data for your businesses?
Well, I think from the start, right? Originally, there wasn't very much. I think to Ian's point, there wasn't a lot of data out there, and what was out there wasn't very clean. And so you were looking at if you were looking at anything, you were looking at the basics, right? You were looking at revenue, margin, average transaction value, maybe, right? Maybe. If you had all of that, maybe by category, if it was clean, if you had done a great job having one person input it all the time, right? I think that's changed so much. It has moved so beyond that in terms of the system, the data architecture, the discipline, and the systems and availability out there, right? To now, to Hoodie's product of, I can see where competitors are pricing their products, right? I'm not sending someone around to shop. What's online is actually consistent and full menu and reliable. All of that stuff has evolved so quickly compared to even 3 years ago, 4 years ago. So I think that's the biggest thing is there's more out there, and therefore we're able to dig in more, whether it's on your assortment architecture, whether it's on your productivity of products, as you look at, people really looking at SKU rationalization as especially as we look at, really focusing on gross margin and cash flow, is our inventory productive, right? What are our customers doing? How are we planning labor? I just think all of that has grown so much, and you have so much capability to do that now that you never did before.
Kelly, that brings up a really interesting point, the concept of dirty data, which is an ongoing issue in the cannabis industry. There are various folks at companies trying to address this with data standards and things like that, Hoodie has a really unbelievable amount of data coming into the system every day as you're looking at these dispensary menus. And this data is not necessarily coming in a standardized way. Can you talk a little bit about Hoodie's approach to cleaning data and how important having clean data is? I've on more than one occasion been really excited to see a data set coming out of a specific company or even coming from data firms, and started looking at it and realized that this is useless. It's not.
Yeah, no,
it's not helpful.
Yeah, data is at the core. It has to be clean. It has to be something that is standardized so that you can have a conversation. Even if one company has perfectly clean data and another company has perfectly clean data, if they've done that in a vacuum, they're not going to be able to talk to each other. Simple example, you can go right now to different, menus that are out there, and sometimes, vape carts are going to be classified underneath concentrates, and on another menu, it could be classified as its own separate category of vapes, right? So even that, where they're both, you can make an argument for either one, right? But there needs to be some consistency out in the market. In our company, we pull in all of that data as it appears. We have our standard hierarchy that we use, that we are every single day cleaning the data as it's coming in. We've got near real-time updates of those menus, especially the ones that have the most churn, most movement day to day. And as they come in, we're making sure that the category is clean, the brand's clean, the size, the actual item description itself is clean, so that when Rory and his wholesale team can go in and quickly take a look at their brand, they can see how they stack up versus the competition. They can quickly see where specific items that they might want to move out of inventory, they can identify quickly where they are. And then they can look holistically at the market to understand, what's the average price of an eighth of flower, for example. Without having that clean data source, that's not just clean in and of itself, but it's also standardized across the industry. You can't make even some of those basic decisions until you've got that. And it's really the heart and the foundation of everything we do here at Hoodie.
And Rory, can you talk maybe a little bit about how you think about keeping your company's data clean? Do you have standards? How do you think about that? How do you make sure that when you're setting KPIs, the data coming in and feeding those is actually useful?
Sure. So, and Kelly kind of nailed it. It's all about accessibility and the trustworthiness of data. And Callie said something interesting a minute ago, that how different it was 4 or 5 years ago. I remember a time 5 years ago, 4.5 years ago, where I had to task, or do it myself in some cases, task a salesperson with spending 4 or 5 hours on a Monday, right? Just, sort of scouring iHeart Jane menus and Dutchie menus to try to find out, okay, what's our menu position on 50 different menus, right? And we would try to sort of catalog that or memorialize that in a spreadsheet. I mean, it was incredibly time consuming and not a good use of a salesperson's time, because then they're not out selling. So now to be able to have things like the Hoodie desktop app or the sales enablement app, every one of our salespeople has on their phone the ability to, in real time, sit in a parking lot and say, okay, here's where we're low in inventory, or here's a gap in their menu. I'm going to walk in here and talk to this buyer about the fact that we have gummies at a 200 milligram per unit, and they don't have any on their menu. Oh, and by the way, the 3 dispensaries in a 5-mile radius do have it, right? So there was no way to get to that data or trust the data if we sort of did think we had arrived at it. So it's just it's a new day and age. But, I guess to answer your question, we rely on third-party platforms like Hoodie and some of the other ones that are out there to inform, not only our decision making, but how do we evaluate ourselves, right? On these key KPIs that, I drill into everyone's head every single day. How do we know that the data in which we're judging ourselves is accurate? And we rely on people like Hoodie. So
excellent. And Ian, when you're looking at at businesses, what are you looking for in terms of data? What are some examples of the kinds of data that you might expect to see? Maybe examples of data that you would have loved to see, but maybe weren't there or weren't clean. What's important to you from a data standpoint?
I think most important is to accept that all data lies to some extent, and that any service provider that's providing data should be more than willing to explain where the limitations of their sample of a given population is, because no one has the full look. It doesn't matter what company you're talking about, whether it's an operator or a service provider. There probably never will be one company that kind of has the all-seeing eye in this case. So first and foremost, you have to accept that there are going to be limitations. And, you know, the concept of garbage in, garbage out, that you can still make some inferences, but you have to really root that in. Okay, where is this going to trip me up if I rely too much on this? And how can I corroborate what one thing is telling me by maybe finding other ways to confirm or deny a previous view that you might have? As for companies, it's not so much what data they have that we're interested in. I think it's more to do with how, where they know what they don't know and what they do know. And I think this is rooted in some degree of humility, where none of us, again, have all the answers. And so I get pretty nervous if someone starts to tell me about how much they know, because I know how much I don't know. And I know how many other people don't really have the full understanding. So I think it more has to do with this kind of understanding of where it can help you, where it can hurt you.
Excellent. So one of the things that I think about a lot in our consulting work is the different ways in which we use data to drive business decisions, and sometimes that's looking at very specific metrics and making sure that someone's looking at those metrics every day to make sure that they're hitting targets that you want to hit, and if they're falling short, coming in and addressing those. Another thing that we often do is just look at data and look for outliers, look for things that don't seem to fit a trend or don't seem to fit your expectation. What we often find is that it usually takes some digging, but we can find some really interesting either opportunities or threats for a business by looking at the data points that aren't what's expected or aren't in line. Can any of you talk about sort of your orientation to data when it comes to like setting really easy to follow metrics and looking at that, or conversely just looking for things that don't quite fit and then digging deeper into those things?
I've got one, and it's topical in the sense that we haven't fully legalized in every state, and it's no secret that there are certain, let's say, retail strategies that focus on let's call it border plays. For instance, Illinois right now, there is no question that state has historically benefited from, let's say, outsized demand, a little bit of maybe higher than you might expect type of purchase behavior, especially around borders. And we know what's going on there. There are people that are coming from Missouri, or used to be, or Wisconsin, still are. And that is in many ways pulling up an average. Let's say if you're focused on average transaction value, just as an example. And so you can fool yourself very quickly if you think that that is going to stick around forever. I think Illinois is learning that right now, as Missouri and Arkansas have legalized, and you're seeing some of these border plays really feel the pain. And if you assume that this good going is just going to keep going on, it's going to, again, lead to some, I think, bad decisions on a corporate level.
From a retail perspective, any thoughts on what are some maybe not as obvious data points that retailers might consider looking at a regular basis, whether those are data points generated within their own business or things coming from a service provider, things coming from a data company like Hoodie Analytics?
I think there's a couple things. I think it's very easy to get caught on top line stuff as one, right? It's very easy to sit there and say, okay, hey, let's look at assortment and pricing and productivity and ATV, and we can look at that, or you can look at customer counts. I think one of the things that I think is really helpful, especially in the environment we're at, is really looking at, I think customer behavior, it will always be valid, but also looking at your expense line items, right? So labor is your probably number one expense, besides COGS, your number one expense line item in a retail environment. And I think, we all know where the labor market is. It's both tight and expensive. Are we being the most efficient with our labor? So are you scheduling according to how your business is flowing and revenue? Do you have goals in terms of how many hours you're giving the stores? And do you have a sales per associate hour goal? How are you managing your labor? What's your full and part-time mix? And is that making sense to, the fluctuations of your business, knowing, and there is seasonality, there's holidays, there's all of that goes into the business. So I would say that's sort of maybe the next level of looking at data that is, I think, just starting in the industry, but is a real opportunity, a place to join kind of other larger retail businesses, is really looking at the expense line items, not just top line and margin.
Excellent. And what about from a wholesale perspective? Are there any sort of non-obvious data points that might be interesting to look at from a wholesale perspective?
Yeah, I think there are, and there's ones that I try to keep an eye on. And David, you kind of identified it. There's like internal data that we can analyze, stuff like delivery lead times, right? So how many days go by between receiving and approving an order and getting that order delivered at a dispensary? We aim for 48 to 72 hours, but if we're averaging, in some cases or some states, 7 days or 5 days or something like that, there's a significant amount of time in which you're not on that shelf and not experiencing sell-through. So sort of trying to focus on that and minimizing the number of days that you might not be sellable on somebody's shelves, obviously is something that we pay close attention to. We also track third-party dispensary buying cadence, right? So how many days generally go by between, orders from a specific dispensary, and we'll try to monitor that so that we can inform our sales reps activities. Listen, it's been 2 days outside of their normal ordering cadence, or the delta now is 10 days. What's happening? Or they haven't ordered in 30 days and they normally order every 6 days. So we try to monitor those kind of things. But, I also like to just look at broad data that I can access through Hoodie. And I've identified significant threats and significant opportunities just by trending category movement, right? Or if you look at the top selling 100 SKUs in the vapes, sometimes I'll suss out that, listen, there's a significant movement towards high volume, vape categories, a 1 gram disposable. And I think people are going to get into even larger volume disposables. And those are things that I don't know you would see coming unless you sort of just sift through broad data and try to see sort of anomalies out there that, we don't have this in our P mix. Is that a problem? And then try to address that and make it into an opportunity.
So the one thing I'd add into that as a hidden data point, I don't know if it's quite hidden versus just wasn't available in the past, but is now, is really understanding where customers are going. So certainly, who's shopping. So over as a dispensary, who's coming into your door and who's buying, but you don't know who they're buying from next week or 2 weeks from now. And being able to track to understand just how loyal your customer base is and who your competition truly is can be incredibly insightful for dispensaries. You might assume it's the dispensary across the street, but it might be really the dispensary 5 miles up the road because of the assortment that's being offered or the different types of activities or events that are happening in those dispensaries. The other advantage of being able to finally see that type of information is really on the wholesale side too, being able to identify opportunities. So Rory, you're just talking about the tracking that you're doing, but something that we're going to be releasing soon is going to be giving the opportunity, actually putting a dollar value behind that. So you can start prioritizing the doors you're not in, or even for the doors that you are, where do you have the most opportunity for what's out there from a dollar perspective. So you can be really surgical and really focused and efficient with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Real quick, just one thought on that. I think this new development in Hoodie is going to be huge. We try to value all of our partnerships. We try to estimate, monthly revenue, but it's, we're throwing a dart at a dartboard in many cases. And so, to be able to have a little bit more trustworthy data in that is going to be a game changer for wholesale operators for sure, to be able to know where should we be focusing our efforts.
Absolutely.
So one of the things we spend a lot of time doing in our consulting practice is trying to figure out what kinds of data might be good for answering certain business questions. People come to us and they, for example, want to figure out what state or states to expand to based on their brand, their product mix, their positioning, their the kinds of consumers they appeal to, and we have to look at what data is out there, what data is available, and what data can we leverage to try to make good decisions about something like this. Sometimes it's a much smaller question, like you mentioned in this tendency for there to be cross-border traffic. If you're looking at making an investment in a business that sits on the border, how are new laws that pass going to change how much business those dispensaries see? And that can be a complicated question, but there's all sorts of data available to try to answer that question. Things like looking at GPS data from customers entering the parking lot to see where their home state is. If 50% of your customers are coming from out of state and that state is about to legalize, that might be an indicator. Even if you don't have access to something like GPS data, you can sit in a parking lot and look at license plates. Do you have any tips for folks who they have real business problems, big or small, and they're trying to figure out how to sort of think about data, how to identify what kinds of data that they can use to make better business decisions?
Yes, I would strongly encourage anyone that's an operator to not manage your business by rote checklist. I got to have this because I've heard of this. For example, loyalty points. A lot of people think they need loyalty points. The dirty secret is you don't really need loyalty points. California, for instance, $6 billion market, $750 million, $770 million last year was spent on discounts in California. And based on a report that actually a friend of Hoodie's, Happy Cabbage Analytics, put out, looks like about half of that, you might as well be lighting that money on fire. And the other half, you can probably be deploying much more intelligently. So I think the most important thing is don't assume that you need certain things just because you've heard about it. You should really start in a rooting of what am I trying to accomplish first? And then move outward from there. And just because someone tells you that such and such is the preferred platform, there are companies that I'm not going to name that are not on this call that I think there's a lot of reliance on, let's say, things that people think they need when they maybe don't actually need it.
I think it's really important to be clear about your goals and make sure that you know that they are attainable and understandable. I think it's really easy to get lost in a lot of numbers, trying to figure out, having everybody, have different things that they think they're trying to achieve, but really sitting there and starting with kind of a clean and simple set of, here are the things that we want to track and look at, because this is what's of value to us. This is what drives our profitability. This drives our margin. This drives our efficiency, whatever it might be. But being really clear about that and keeping it, I would say starting off simple, like keeping it a pretty simple set of data that everybody can understand. There's always room to build on it, but it's, numbers can be really overwhelming for a lot of people. And it can also, bog you down, slow you down, and become, paralyze your business just looking at numbers. So I think the biggest thing to start with is, hey, do we know what are the, our 5 data points to start with? What are they? What are our targets that we want to track? And then do we make sure that, we've said a bunch, the data is clean, like the inputs to track those are consistent, and like focusing there and then building out, because it's just, it can easily get to be too much. And, we all know this industry moves really quickly. And so it's better to sort of start simple and add than try to do a big thing and get lost and miss the boat in the shuffle.
Yeah, that's definitely a really good point. There are a lot of companies that I've seen that are chasing a specific metric, and maybe that's the right metric to be chasing, and maybe it's not. Customer loyalty is a really interesting one that we've looked at quite a bit. When you're looking at brands, some brands, most brands in cannabis have really low customer loyalty. It varies a little bit by product form, but in general, it tends to be low. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If you look at some brands that have really broad appeal, there are lots of customers that will come in and buy that once, and maybe they'll come in 6 months or a year later and it's on sale and they'll get it again. If they're busy focused on chasing customer loyalty, they might end up moving into a very different kind of market. A really good example of this is a brand called Heavy Hitters that they do really well, and they chase customer loyalty, or I don't know if they chase it, but they have really strong customer loyalty. They have a very specific aesthetic. They have a very targeted product line that's going after a really specific kind of customer. That's great for them, but the downside of that is that there are a huge number of customers who are never going to touch a product that looks like that. But another company like Select that just goes for a really clean, appealing, inoffensive look might have a broader customer base with less loyalty. So really understanding what you're going for your brand and chasing the metrics that matter for what you're building, I think is a really important thing. We've seen a lot of people spin their wheels or end up being going in counterproductive directions because they don't have a good sense of what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, if I could just add to that. Sorry, Tali, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it all goes to being more targeted. I think the industry is just continues to move quickly, right? And it used to be, if you build it, they will come. It didn't really matter what was on your shelf. As long as you had product on your shelf, people would buy it. You've gotten more competition, but now I think it's a question of, all right, what are you standing for? What's your target? Are you being specific in terms of what you're trying to accomplish? And it's not one size fits all. And I think that's going to happen as the customer base gets bigger, as as the brand selection gets larger, as the dispensary environment gets larger, all of that, people, everybody's going to have to be more targeted and more thoughtful about what they do. And that goes to Ian's earlier point, whether it's pricing and promotions, and it's not just everything for everyone, but it's, hey, how am I targeting Kelly, who's the vape customer, and really sitting there and serving her something that's going to be impactful for her behavior versus, Ian, that's a flower customer every day, and he's a value flower customer. I just think you're going to start getting more and more into segmentation, and it's more important to sit there and say, okay, what am I really trying to be, and not just chase kind of the name or the number on that one, is to really sit there and say, where's it going and how do I skate to where the puck's going, not, what people are doing today.
So two thoughts I wanted to add. One on this most recent comment around brand and loyalty in particular. It can be really hard to build loyalty no matter what industry you're in, especially in an industry like this. The one caveat I will say, though, is brand really does matter. Otherwise, everything is going to be a commodity, and it's just going to be how cheap can we sell all the product for, right? So, there is obviously there's going to be a value consumer, but there's also going to be folks that are going to be interested in the more premium products or just having the variety of the mainstream, right? So there's something to be mindful of as we think about whether it's your dispensary name or whether it's your brand around building out brands for consumers. Otherwise, it's going to continue this race to the bottom on price and promotion. But to switch gears real quick, to go to the original question around how do we start? What do I do with data to help us be successful? I agree with everything people were saying. I would add, try and use data in a way that's tactical. So it's 100% great to know what sales are overall and how they've been trending. And you need to know that in the state, like how's vapes doing, how flower is doing. But if you really are limited in resources, what can you do that will make your life easier and more efficient to get those sales, right? So if you're on the retail side or on the dispensary side or wholesale side, it might be just show me where I'm out of stock, right? That helps me be faster than having to manually look up all the menus myself. Or on the dispensary side, it might be help me understand the pricing in my market or understand the assortment in my market a little bit better so that I can make tactical decisions and pivot quickly and be able to do something actionable with the data that I have today, especially if you're just starting out, would be my thought on how to answer that question.
Excellent. And one of the questions that came up in the chat is, how would you think about data specifically in the context of a micro business, a small business that is operating a small cultivation, for example? You're not a big MSO with a giant multi-state footprint and hundreds or thousands of employees. What advice would you give to very small businesses, very small operators in the cannabis industry?
I think stay targeted, like understand what you're trying to be and be laser focused on that, and not get sucked in to, trying to be bigger, trying to be everything to everybody. Like if you've got limited resources and everything you do, I'd be like, pick what you want to stand for and stick to it. And make sure that you're really focusing everything you do on that one thing. Everybody's really clear on what the mission is. Everybody's really clear on what your focus is, and really you really pay attention to just those things, because I think it's so easy. I mean, look, the amount of, you look at menus and the amount of SKUs that are on a lot of these markets is overwhelming. And so I think, to do well, you have to really stick to your guns.
Yeah, I agree with Allie here in a profound way. I think for very small businesses that may only have flower or a vape line or some very limited scope of what they do, you have to decide, what space or position you want to occupy in the hearts and minds of the customer. Figure out how you're going to get there, and then beat that drum every day. Remind everyone every single day that that's what you are and that's what you do. And I think that's how you cut through the noise, especially in a rec market. And
just before I hand it back to Jeff to wrap up, I would love it if each of you gave one sort of final takeaway for folks that are watching this. What's one thing that they should really keep top of mind when it comes to data? If they only take one thing away from this this webinar.
I'll start. I think that so as we approach data and think about how we can use data to better inform our decisions and make sure that ourselves and our businesses are successful, it's important to keep in mind that in this industry, and Ian sort of touched on it, this is rooted in a legacy of sort of submersive behavior, and there's a deep ingrained culture here. So there is a risk, I think, of getting mired in the data and sort of paralysis by analysis. So, keep in mind that we are trying to relate to and be identifiable with a very specific culture that branches far beyond the stoner culture, right? But if we can kind of take a step back from data sometimes and keep in mind that these are patients and customers that are using this product to improve their lives, I think that's always best.
That's it. Don't make assumptions, and always come back to the customer's behavior. That's ultimately what we're talking about here. That's what's going to propel this industry to be bigger than alcohol, bigger than pets. It's going to get there, and that's at an individual customer basis. It rolls up ultimately to that. And that customer can either be the end consumer, or it can be, if you're wholesale, obviously your retail customer, but it just focus on your customer.
I would say keep it simple. Like start simple. Like just start with the basics of blocking and tackling. Do I have clean data? Do I, in the 5 metrics that I want to look at? Start focused on that and build that discipline and that culture of data and clean data. Start there and add. Don't try to do too much all at once. I think there's enough going on, and there's still a lot of movement in the industry that it's easy to get lost.
I would add, we know this, the industry is constantly evolving. There's no signs of that slowing down. When you are working with third party like Hoodie, make sure you're partnering with someone who can provide data that you can action against, and companies that can pivot and evolve as quickly as the industry does, so that you can really keep a pulse on what's happening and you can make decisions on a day-to-day basis on what you need to do to be successful in the market.
All fantastic advice. I would jump on something that Ian said. Don't make assumptions. We've seen this over and over and over again. We were working with a brand that was in the process of implementing an entire new rebrand, and they were doing it based on the assumption that they knew who their customer was. And when we started looking into it, we realized that the demographic that they thought was a majority of their customers was in fact, less than a quarter of their customers. And they were really about to shift the whole brand messaging to target what ended up being a small minority of their customers. So when you're making decisions, when possible, check against data to see if the assumptions that you have are accurate. Great. With that, I will hand it back to Jeff. Thank you all for joining us. Fantastic discussion, and I'll see you all soon.
Thank you, David. You got some great gems today, right? One about gathering good data on the cost side, right? The correlation of labor staffing to retail demand from Tally. For me, and the notion of not to fool yourself with potentially unsustainable sales lift from day travelers from bordering states, right? And comments about the way in which that can skew transaction size, like great stuff, right? Also for me, and the real value or lack of value from issuing loyalty points in California, right? Not obvious. Great stuff. And I hope you all got real value today. I know I learned a lot. All right, so let's thank these great panelists for the contribution today. And again, very insightful. And of course, I want to thank our strategic alliance partners again to make this possible, and certainly you, our viewers. I'd also like to acknowledge our production team, Carolyn and Guillermo for managing the back end, and Connor for managing our live streaming. And I think this replay will be added to our library probably sometime late next week. So for those of you that who maybe missed part of it, would like to take a look, please do so. Stay tuned for our upcoming live and digital programming announcements. They'll be coming. I think we have another poll up. I'll let it hang there a minute. I think that does it for us. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.